Hi there, my name is Steve Schwartz and I'm the founder of the LSAT blog. I've been coaching the LSAT for over 10 years now, and one of the things I've noticed is that the LSAT prep companies focus a lot on the content of the exam, which of course is essential, but they don't do enough to focus on the other sides of getting ready for test day. In particular, properly simulating LSAT test day conditions, along with preparing for and dealing with nerves and anxiety and strategies to mitigate those. So what I've done is I've created an entire series of videos covering each aspect of getting ready for test day, both before, during, and afterwards. And there were about 24 in all. And I thought to myself, well, it's great that there are all these bite-sized ones out there, but what if I were to put them all together into one big compilation video? So that's what I've done for you today. It runs around an hour and a half, and I don't expect you to watch it all at once. So you can pause it, stop, go as you like. I'm also including timestamps below the video if you would like to jump to a particular portion of the video to cover a specific topic. But I myself, I like to just binge watch things and watch longer videos, and so that's part of why I created this. Anyway, I hope you find it helpful. Any questions, please feel free to reach out. Please hit that subscribe button to be notified of future videos as I release them, and enjoy. Let's talk about registering for the LSAT. First of all, you want to register as soon as possible. In fact, if you haven't already registered, pause this video, go to lsac.org and register ASAP. The reason for this is that the best LSAT test centers get filled up early. The ones that have the best proctors, the ones that have the best desks, the ones that tend to be most conveniently located to major cities. So unless you want to have to fly back home to your parents or get a hotel room somewhere far from home, I would recommend registering sooner rather than later. If you want to avoid the most problematic test centers, then I would recommend searching online for reviews. There's a wiki out there. A number of test prep companies have reviews listed, so I would definitely check those out for the most current information. Finally, deadlines. Deadlines are real. LSAC does not take any exceptions, so note the deadlines again on lsac.org and make sure you're on top of them if you don't register now, because maybe you're not sure when you're taking it. Note the deadlines and mark them in your calendar. Here is some of the relevant contact information for LSAC, their website, the test day rules website, which we will be talking about a lot more later. And if you have any questions, how to reach LSAC, their email address and their phone number. So definitely get in touch with them, because the sooner you get your response and get everything squared away, the better off you'll be. Let's talk about what test day looks like. The LSAT is a long exam totaling just over 4 hours from start to finish. And that's only if everything goes according to plan. Now, I'll share with you how I arrived at that number. We've got getting started, basic housekeeping stuff like they read you the rules, you bubble in your name and your address and your social security number or other documentation and all that sorts of stuff. You have to fill out a certifying statement in cursive stating that you won't cheat. That all probably takes around 30 minutes. Then you have the 4 scored 35-minute sections, which by my math would be 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's 2 logical reasoning, 1 logic games, 1 reading comprehension. Then you have 2 unscored 35-minute sections, which would be 1 hour and 10 minutes. One of those is the experimental, which could be any of games, reasoning, or reading comp, and it could appear anywhere in the first 5 sections. Then, after you do the first 5 regular sections, you'll have the writing sample. So far we've got 3 hours and 30 minutes of content, plus 30 minutes for the housekeeping stuff. Then, you've also got a break between the 3rd and 4th sections that will effectively be 10 to 15 minutes. So that's the full count, 4 hours, 15 minutes. Your mileage may vary on test day. Sometimes the proctors don't know what they're doing. They can't find the booklets. And so if that sort of stuff happens, you might be there much longer. And if you are a smoker or you have the need to take medicine at some frequent interval, you may want to consider accommodations, or at the very least adjust your studying and your test day practice based on the knowledge that without accommodations, just the standard LSAT test day length is over 4 hours. Let's talk about what to do in the final weeks leading up to the day of the exam itself, especially how to prepare using the experimental section. Now, in my LSAT study schedules, you may have noticed that I recommend that you include extra sections in your practice tests, aside from the 4 published in the LSAC versions. You might be wondering why I would recommend something like this. As you've seen when we discussed how long test day will be, there is that experimental section. LSAC is basically using test takers as lab rats. Like many organizations that administer standardized exams, think back to the SAT. LSAC includes this unscored experimental section and doesn't tell you which one it is, because if you knew which one it was, you'd probably take a nap to recuperate between the sections you care the most about, the scored ones. But there's a good reason for this. The experimental sections actually allow LSAC to pre-test questions with several thousand applicants, which helps them determine which questions deserve to make it into future scored sections. Of course, this isn't great for you, because not knowing which section the experimental is can make it difficult to decide whether to cancel your score on test day if things don't go well. Of course, you could always look online on forums where you'll find out those details. But if you were to bomb the experimental, it could have no impact. At the same time, though, if you bomb it, it could then psychologically affect your performance later. And of course, there's the downside that being forced to spend 35 minutes doing unpaid research for LSAC isn't really quite fair. But it is what it is. Now, because you'll see a 5-section exam on test day rather than just 4, it's essential to prepare with that in mind. One student, Katie, wrote to me with the following question. She asked me, I've been taking 4-section time tests for a while now, but I'm starting to take 5 and 6-section timed exams, as you suggest. I assume that the type of extra sections I include should vary from test to test. So maybe on one day I do a game section, another day a reading comp or LR section. Is this what you would recommend? Great question, Katie. Absolutely yes. 2 ways you can handle this. One is that you could rotate the type of extra section you use based on its content. So you could do 4 normal sections, then an extra games, or 4 normal sections, an extra section of reading comp, etc. But you could also make the extra section the one that you like the least. And doing a combination of both of these strategies is probably ideal. So figure out what you dread the most and include it a bit more often than the others. Here's some more questions that students commonly ask. Where should I place the unscored section? Previously, in past years, it used to be that the unscored experimental would be only in one of the first 3 sections. But they've changed things, so if you read that online, it's outdated. Now, it can be any one of the 5 sections. So it's unfortunate that you might have to take the unscored section earlier when you're less tired, but just remember that everyone else is in the same boat. They're affected just the same way. The most important thing, though, is mixing up sections. On test day, of course, you won't know which is the experimental. So for this reason, you might want to lay out the sections from each exam beforehand. Take the 4 from the scored exam and 1 unscored experimental and mix them together. That way, you won't know which ones are scored and which ones aren't, and you'll be forced to put the same effort into each. Take this for example. You could do exams numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then take exam number 5 and divide it into its 4 sections and take exam 5, section 1, put it inside exam number 1, mix them around so you don't know which is which. Do the same for the other sections of exam 5 in exams 2, 3, and 4. Then later, you could add up your results from exam 5, which you've taken on 4 separate occasions, or at least parts of it. You add those together, you get a resulting score from that. This is what you want to be doing in your final weeks primarily. Full-length tests, starting with a few 4-section exams and gradually moving up to 5-section exams. To avoid burnout, space out full-length timed exams across the week, not doing 2 in one day and not doing them on consecutive days. So that's pretty much my basic guidelines. I have a schedule laid out for you along with this video so that you can get some more tips on what to do as those final weeks come to a close. Let's talk about how to decide whether to postpone your test date. Most people, first of all, should not postpone because you can always withdraw later, but I'm putting this information out there since it is an option that LSAC provides. First thing you want to do is note the test date change deadline. This is the postponement deadline, and it's typically about 3 weeks before the exam itself. At that time, you want to analyze your scores. And based on the average of your most recent 5 exam scores or so, that's going to be the best indication of where you're most likely to score on test day. Most people don't have miraculous score jumps, and most people also don't have massive score drops. Most people score within a few points of their average. So based on your predicted LSAT score, decide whether you'd be happy with a score at or close to that one. If you're not within a few points of where you want to be, then consider postponing your test date. The biggest thing you can do to avoid a test day score drop is to overcome test anxiety. Now, in case you weren't aware, it's incredibly common for students to get high scores on practice exams, then experience a test day drop. It's important to make sure the scores you're getting on practice exams are a real indicator of what you'll get on the actual exam. This is the best way to avoid a test day score drop. But first, we've got to understand why these drops happen. 2 main reasons. 1, nerves and anxiety, stress. The second, failure to properly simulate test day conditions. Both of these are completely preventable. Right now, we'll talk about overcoming the anxiety portion specifically. Now, ironically, some people find stress actually boosts their scores. And that's because there's positive stress, which helps people shine, and then there are the other people who fall apart under stress. I'm not an expert on stress, but one thing I've heard that can help people with stress reduction or anxiety reduction is meditation and various guided visualization and relaxation techniques. I've experienced the benefits of these techniques personally, and I've seen the results they get for my students as well. Meditation or any of these other techniques can be helpful because what they let you do is turn your actual official LSAT test day into just another practice test. Now, when I'm talking about meditation, I'm actually talking about meditation as it applies to developing focus and concentration, helping you avoid getting distracted when you have to read those really dense and often boring passages or logical reasoning stimuli. But I think it has a number of other benefits too. It doesn't even have to be something spiritual in nature, could just be something you do for practical reasons for the benefits. Even just 5 minutes a day could really help. Of course, if you don't like it, don't do it, but at least give it a shot. Of course, there are a variety of ways you can center yourself. Sleep, minimizing stress outside the LSAT, and if that means minimizing your work obligations, school or family obligations, do it. You want to maintain a healthy diet. You also want to make sure you're getting enough exercise. And if things do get really bad, of course, consider seeing a therapist to help. In upcoming videos, I'll be sharing more on meditation as well as how to maximize all of these other ways you can center yourself. Meditation. I was as surprised as you might be, but a few years back, I came across a study reporting that students who received meditation training improved their GRE scores significantly over those who didn't. Now, why might this have occurred? Well, meditation typically requires training the mind to focus on something specific. Of course, then, developing this ability could help you learn to prevent your mind from wandering. If you were able to develop the ability to concentrate while meditating, and you were more aware of your thoughts, you'd probably then be more likely to be able to stay focused in other settings, like during test day itself. Obviously useful during any standardized test, really, especially if you find the topic boring and the test is strictly timed. So here's an excerpt from a New York Times article describing the study I was referencing. And here's that study. How meditation might boost your test scores. After 2 weeks, the students were re-evaluated for mind wandering and working memory capacity and given another version of the GRE reading comprehension section. The group who was focused on nutrition, their results did not change. The group that took mindfulness training, however, mind wandered less and performed better on tests of working memory capacity and reading comprehension. For example, before the training, the average GRE verbal score was 460. 2 weeks later, it was 520. That's a 60-point increase. That's pretty significant when we're talking out of 800. So after reading this, I tried mindfulness meditation for myself. And ever since, I've been meditating on a daily basis for about 20 to 25 minutes at a time. And I think that honestly, I've derived a variety of benefits from it, not just limited to LSAT specific abilities. It's a lot simpler than you might think. Basically, I sit in a dark, quiet room, close my eyes, and focus on my breathing for a while. During this time, I try to be more aware of what I'm thinking and feeling than I am under ordinary circumstances. And of course, when I'm pressed for time, I might do only 5 to 10 minutes instead of longer. And I believe that even this alone is sufficient to provide benefits. If you're interested in trying this out for yourself, the best resource I've come across on the topic is a book that's available online for free called Mindfulness in Plain English. Now, don't be put off by references to Buddhism in the introduction if that's not your thing. Once the book actually gets into the substance, the text is remarkably secular. And if you don't want to read an entire book, I have some links for you as well that just focus on the benefits associated with meditation and the basic 101 on how to do it. So here are a few different kinds of meditation aside from what I mentioned previously, which is mindfulness alone. There's breathing meditation where you focus on your breath, simply your inhales and exhales, and just focus on noticing those. There's the body scan technique where you start from the top of your head and scan your body all the way down, relaxing your muscles completely on the way. And there are MP3s and videos out there for any of these, honestly. There's loving kindness meditation where you wish well for others. Jack Kornfield has some meditations out there in this style. And there's also mantra meditation where you just focus on mentally repeating one statement or a syllable over and over and over. So lots of different styles out there, lots of things you can try out. I would try multiple, don't necessarily try only one. And there are also many apps out there for meditation if you're more technologically inclined and want something that breaks it down more simply. Headspace and Calm are two of the most popular, but there are many others out there that are good as well. You can also search YouTube. A lot of great meditations on YouTube. You can look for guided meditations. You can look for self-hypnosis. You can search loving kindness or any of those other techniques I laid out. There's one more I didn't mention, which is called Yoga Nidra, which is a style of meditation that often involves a body scan, and it helps you get into a very deeply relaxed state. So I'd recommend looking that up as well. All of these are just tools and techniques you can use to quiet your mind and improve your focusing ability. It's made a big difference for me. I still continue it to this day, and it's made a big difference for my students as well. So you really have nothing to lose just by starting off even just 3 minutes the first time, and try it out, take it from there. Give it a shot, and let me know how it goes for you. All right, let's talk about how you can get pumped up. One thing you can do is make a test day playlist that inspires you. A couple favorite movies: Legally Blonde, Erin Brockovich, My Cousin Vinny. There's also the movie and TV show Friday Night Lights, lots of which contain motivational speeches and motivational stories that you can get inspiration from. A lot of students also love making playlists of music playlists, so you can include things like Jock Jams, Eye of the Tiger. There's YouTube videos that have 40 inspirational speeches in 2 minutes, so look up some of those. I have some links to those as well associated with this lesson, so you can benefit from what others have put together. I also really recommend, along the lines of both meditation and exercise to get you pumped, is yoga. And if you can't make it to a class, that's fine. There's lots of great YouTube videos that will help you with yoga out there. Yoga with Adrienne's probably the most popular. That one's great for beginners. And if you're a little bit more experienced or you want something different, try out Fight Master Yoga. Each of these, again, they're YouTube channels. Check them out. If you can't do the YouTube thing, you can't do video, that's fine. There's also actually yoga podcasts, believe it or not. There's a bunch out there. I've tried this one, Yoga Downloads. They have 20-minute yoga sessions. Again, totally free. Definitely worth taking advantage of, or at least trying out. If you have the stories or excuses that you can't make it to a class, you don't have time, you could do these at home. You could spend just 20 minutes or even less doing something physical that gets you pumped up. And maybe alongside that, listening to some of these videos or listening to some of these playlists I mentioned earlier, like Jock Jams or 40 inspirational speeches in 2 minutes. Great ways to get pumped up, surrounding yourself with positive, uplifting media that inspires you and energizes you. So think about what that could look like and send me some of your favorites. I'd love to see what you put together. Let's talk about mental hacks for test day success. Mental hacks to avoid that test day score drop. We've already talked a little bit about meditation. I want to go a little bit more into guided visualizations, specifically as they relate to our imagined best case and worst case scenarios. A lot of times, it turns out that our concerns are not nearly as bad as we thought they would be, and articulating them fully will help us feel more in control and less overwhelmed, help us focus on the positives. And ironically, that starts with writing down all your worries, all your concerns, and thinking them through. So let's, for example, ask the question, what happens in 3 to 5 years if I get my desired score, parentheses, on this LSAT administration? We've got to lower the stakes here, because sometimes we think so much about what will happen if we don't get a good score, and we limit our scope to this exam, when in reality, this specific test is not everything. Obviously, the LSAT is important, but only the highest test score counts. And furthermore, even if you did not get a good LSAT score, period, you would still be okay. Going back to that question, what happens 3 to 5 years from now? A funny thing happens. It turns out that for some students, their worst case scenario is not nearly as bad as they thought it would be. I had a student recently I was talking with on this very question. She was stressed, she was anxious, she was worried that if, despite multiple attempts, she could not get her desired score, she would have to go back to undergrad and get another degree in order to become a social worker or some sort of psychologist. And I happen to know quite a few social workers, and I know that you can major in virtually anything and go on to get a master's in social work. And this girl, maybe she majored in English or poli-sci, I forget what, but she thought she'd have to go back to undergrad and tell her parents, oh, I wasted 4 years of undergrad, got to go get a second BA. Turns out that was not the case. And so once we removed the stress around getting a great LSAT score overall, we could then move on to reducing the stakes of this particular LSAT exam, because retaking is more common than ever, and having to study for another retake or having to apply later in the cycle matters much less than it ever used to before. So really, there is no need to worry about placing all the stakes on this one test. You can go out there and treat test day just like another practice test that just happens to be administered with a proctor. You could even register for the next LSAT exam so that you know you have a backup already laid out for yourself. And that helps keep a bit of perspective, realizing that this one exam is not the only one. You want to do well on any given test you take, of course, but it's not life or death. And there's a funny thing you can do, which is simply to visualize a successful test day for yourself. Imagine yourself, and you could do this just in your mind's eye. You could do it while you meditate. You could lay down, close your eyes, and actually imagine what the test center looks like. Picture the desks, picture the proctors, picture the other test takers, and walk through a successful test day experience for yourself. Actually imagine the other test takers, imagine the test booklet, the feel of the newsprint paper, the pencil in your hand, yourself successfully bubbling in correct answers smoothly, seamlessly, not getting bogged down, not second guessing yourself, everything just flowing really nicely. And you might say, well, that's nonsense. If that works, that's the placebo effect. But the funny thing is that the placebo effect works. That's the crazy thing about this. Even if people know it's a placebo effect and that's why they're benefiting, they still benefit either way. So if you don't want to do this sort of thing, you've got to ask yourself, well, is it rational to do something seemingly irrational if it still gets me the results? The placebo effect works, and so even if you're not into meditations or visualizations, you can't deny their benefits. And this one here is from The Guardian, so fairly mainstream source. You could pretend if you want on the day of the exam that you're playing against your friend. Maybe your friend is taking the LSAT on the same day or not, but either way, make it a little bit competitive, make it a little bit of a game, and then you can reduce the importance you place on this crazy exam and avoid that fight or flight response, because after all, it is just a game. It is just another practice test. How to simulate test day, aka the most common LSAT test center problems and how to avoid them. The biggest thing you want to do is prepare for worst case scenarios. I heard from one student in Cairo who wrote to me the following. I took the LSAT here in June. A woman randomly walked into the room while the exam was being administered and just started chatting with the proctor. They were whispering, but it was still audible and very distracting. Also, the electricity in the building went off for around the length of a section, so we resumed taking the exam in the dark with no AC. In Cairo, in June. Needless to say, I canceled my score on the spot. Wow. Imagine if that was your test day experience. Of course, electricity could go out anywhere, and the best you could hope for would be a free retake a few months later with the original test removed from your record entirely. However, there's a very good chance that LSAC might give you nothing at all for your trouble. While there is this element of chance involved, there's a lot you could do to minimize the impact of unexpected test day disasters. As a cautious test taker, you want to prepare for the worst. Rooms do often have little quirks of their own. You might hear noises in some when the heating turns on or off. Just think about all the noises that boilers and pipes make, like hissing. And there's no guarantee you'll get extra time just because there was some sort of disruption. And summertime test takers don't really have an advantage either, because the room might be over air conditioned and feel like a walk-in refrigerator. Other rooms might have no AC at all. And unfortunately, an uncomfortable room is not the only obstacle you might face. I'll cover how to face those more later, but you might also just have difficulty adjusting to actual test day conditions with strict timing, in contrast to however you're doing things at home. So in order to avoid a test day drop, you need to simulate test day conditions similar to those you will be experiencing on test day. Do this as much as you can, because you want to make your actual exam nothing more than just another practice test. Another one in a long line of exams that you've already taken. A big part of that will be strictly timing yourself, not taking a break in the middle of a section to go get a drink or go to the bathroom and pause the clock while you do that. If you want to do that, the clock's going to be running, or you can wait until the break. As we discussed previously, you want to make sure you're doing 5-section exams, not 4. Because on test day, you will experience that experimental section, and you don't want to do only 4 sections on your practice tests, and then say on test day, geez, I was so tired by that last section. You have to be practicing under those realistic conditions. Otherwise, your scores could be falsely inflated when you're getting these super high practice scores, and then you see that drop on test day. So, some ways you can simulate test day and take those practice exams under realistic actual LSAT conditions. Practice on a small desk. I have heard stories, some horror stories, about test takers having really tiny desks where they can't even lay out the full 2 pages of the booklet at once. They can't fit their bubble sheet at the same time. So you definitely want to be ready for that limited space if it happens to you. You also want to bring layers in case the room is too hot or too cold. You want to practice in rooms where the temperature is slightly uncomfortable, like I was saying earlier with the AC or the furnace. All of those environmental factors are out of your control, and I assure you, they are not as likely as your home or your study center to be as comfortable. So be on the lookout for that. Be aware of that possibility. If you can, do a few exams at your actual test center. This obviously isn't possible for everyone. It's based on how close it is to your house and how amenable they are to letting you enter. Some places have stricter security than others. Some universities you can walk right in, others you can't. So give it a shot, talk to people, see what you can do. And of course, do at least 1 or 2 practice exams with distractions. So that could be with other people in the background. It could be at a coffee shop or a library. It could be using one of those test day simulation MP3s or YouTube videos. Just search out there, LSAT Proctor, and you'll find several that include distractions. Really useful to do. And you also want to make sure that you are using a bubble sheet, that you are taking the time to use this bubble sheet as you do practice tests, because it takes time to bubble. It takes time to erase. It takes time to fill those in. And if you're not used to that and you're just at the 35-minute mark, with the bubble sheet, you're going to be over the 35-minute mark. So be aware that you will need to use this and start using it now. Don't underestimate it. You can print out bubble sheets online. You can photocopy them. Make sure that you're getting practice like you will have to practice on the actual thing. So aside from timing with the bubble sheet, you also want to practice ideally with less than 35 minutes per section, a shorter break, or no reminder of the 5-minute warning. Because on test day, the timing might not be perfect, it might not be ideal, and you also want to have a buffer if you can get it. So one trick you can use, going back to the bubble sheet for a minute, is to make a little tiny line on your answer sheet under the number where your section is complete. So let's say your game section has 23 questions. You can make a little tiny line below number 23 on that bubble sheet. And that will help you avoid misbubbling or second guessing yourself as to whether you made some kind of small error. And you also want to start tying up loose ends when you're down to that 5-minute warning. In case they don't give you a 5-minute warning, you have already bubbled for yourself and you don't need to worry about potentially missing out on that. Reports from students indicate that LSAC generally does nothing for people who are shorted on time or not given a 5-minute warning. Of course, most people don't experience this problem, but if it happens to you, it'll be a big deal. Noise. One student wrote to me, there was a loud bing every 2 minutes throughout the entire test. I ended up canceling my scores. So yes, who knows why that bing was happening? It could have been a Proctor's cell phone, could have been some air cooling unit inside the test room. It could have been something from next door. But you can experience noise. It's not going to necessarily be a library-like setting. The proctors might make noise, other test takers might make noise, the room might make noise, or you could have external noise. Some people have seriously reported a marching band practicing outside their test center. If you Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm not making this stuff up, people. It's real. It happens. Maybe more likely at a college in the suburbs or a rural area than in the city. But in the city, of course, you have plenty of noises as well. I know, I live in a city. I hear it all the time. So do your practice tests in noisy environments, like I mentioned. And in the winter months, be prepared for the possibility that you or others might be sick, might be blowing in your nose, you might want to bring cough drops or tissues for yourself and others if you're taking it in the winter. So, or an allergy season maybe. This might not be enough, but at least it's something. You can't always prevent any issue from occurring, but you can do what you can to mitigate the impact they have on you. And that comes from being aware of these beforehand, as well as mindfulness or other forms of meditation that I talked about previously. And of course, motion is a potential issue. One student wrote to me, the person next to me was periodically shaking the table. I had to get the attention of the proctor who saw it and went over to her to request that she stop shaking her body against the table. So yeah, that's a thing. It happens. Aside from the other test takers walking or moving around or shaking, they might be flipping pages. They might be erasing vigorously. The proctors might be walking around or hovering around you. This means really that you've just got to take the LSAT in places you would expect to be much worse than your test center. That's ultimately the bottom line with everything I'm talking about here. Prepare for the worst, simulate distractions, whatever your worst nightmare is, do that to yourself before the exam so that if it happens on the exam, it won't be the first time you experienced it. Another thing to be aware of is pacing. You want to take several exams with strict timing. You want to use the bubble sheet, use the analog watch, rotate the experimental section, and not worry when you're timing yourself what other test takers are doing. Other test takers might have a different section than you do at the same time. So let's say your experimental is first, theirs could be third. You might have games, they might have reading comp. So those psychological things where like that person is going faster than I am, or I'm erasing more than other people are, that's a bad sign. You don't necessarily know what's going on for other students, and maybe they're not erasing when they should be erasing, or maybe they're going too quickly when they should be slowing down a bit. They might have completely different pacing strategies than you do. So if you feel like you're falling behind, that you better skip and move on just because other people are going at a different pace, ignore them. Stay focused on your pacing strategy and remain confident in your techniques. You could also try doing a practice exam with a friend or another student if you are in a study group. This will help you get used to being around other people who write or turn pages faster or slower than you do. You could have a friend proctor an exam for you so you get used to actually having another human being keep time for you. To summarize, you want to simulate distractions, small desk, room being too hot or too cold, other people making noise or moving around, cell phones potentially ringing or beeping, even though, of course, they should not be. Try to have everything be as similar to your actual official test day experience as possible. So overall, for your average exam, you want to do 35-minute sections if you're testing without accommodations. You want to give yourself a 5-minute warning. You want to give yourself a break. You want to practice with the experimental. These are all the norm, of course. If you are simulating a worst case scenario, you want to maybe remove some of these benefits or features. So that's pretty much it on test day simulation. How to deal with the Proctors and LSAC. Got this report from one student recently. I'll share it with you. I took the LSAT and it went badly. After 5 minutes, one of the proctors came up to me and whispered some instruction and I couldn't hear her. I had to ask her to repeat herself. She wanted me to put the lined sheet of paper that fell out of the booklet back into the booklet. She couldn't have told me that in the beginning, before time commenced. I was sitting right up front. So yeah, that's one test day story involving the proctors. Obviously, you can't prepare for everything, but you can be aware. LSAC's website is, of course, the best place to go to get the latest up-to-date rules and information about the test. They have a test day rules specific page, and I have the links for you right here. If you have any questions, you can email them or call them. I recommend actually emailing them and then bringing a printout of their response with you to the test center in case there's some potential dispute that might arise over what you are permitted to bring or not. We'll get into this more later, but I do want to make you aware of some of the biggest test day rules. No cell phones, no digital watch, no electronic devices, period. What you can bring is a 1-gallon sized Ziploc bag along with your photo, admission ticket, pencils, etc. But you want to prepare in advance. You want to thoroughly review LSAC's test day page and upload your photo beforehand. On test day itself, confirm with the proctor beforehand that you will get 35 minutes per section, a 5-minute warning before the end of each section, and a 15-minute break between the third and fourth sections. If your proctor cuts you short on time, notify him or her immediately. It can't hurt to complain, it can only help. Because getting back even 40 to 45 seconds to which you are entitled is significant. That could get you another question or two. If you're shorted on time, LSAC's policy is to allow you to work on relevant sections even after you complete section 5 to make up for the amount of time you were initially shorted. Don't be shy about this, be assertive, because, you do want to be a lawyer, right? Now, even if your proctor doesn't follow this procedure and won't listen to your complaints, you still got to obey all instructions anyway. They are the police or dictators of the room. Don't be overly argumentative. Don't cause a scene. Go ahead, still complete the writing sample and follow all instructions. Otherwise, you may have a dispute with them that leads your score to be invalidated and a mark placed in your file. So if there is this dispute of some kind, don't overly argue with the proctor. Leave the test. When you're finished, notify LSAC immediately after the exam of what happened. And once you're outside the test center, ask other test takers to notify LSAC as well. A report can't hurt you, and the more people who do it, the better. So do what you can. What to eat and drink on test day. Before we get into specifics, I just want to say initially, do whatever you normally do. If you normally have coffee and cigarettes in the morning, don't try to go cold turkey now, or you'll almost certainly find yourself with a pounding headache. If you normally eat a big breakfast, you should probably keep doing that. you don't want to be hungry on test day. If you normally eat light, you don't want to eat too much because then you might feel too full or get sick. As I've shared before, I ate a bagel with an entire can of tuna fish. I had never done that before, and I did this at 6 in the morning within 20 minutes of waking up, and that obviously was not a good idea. So some classic test day breakfasts might be things like oatmeal, yogurt, or eggs. Whatever you do, you want something with protein. So if you have oatmeal with fruit, that might not be enough. You might want some protein as well. And you also don't want to eat too much oatmeal, or else you'll have issues with fiber. It might make you have to go to the bathroom. So keep that in mind. Yogurt is pretty great because it has protein. Eggs also pretty great. They have protein. So if you eat eggs, if you cook them up, I wouldn't have too much fat with them, like butter or oil, because that could make you tired. So maybe you try hard-boiled eggs and prep them the week before. And then you could also have some eggs with your practice tests to simulate your test day breakfast. For the break on test day between sections 3 and 4, or maybe right before starting, you could have granola bars or bananas for a quick sugar energy boost. Water, juice, and coffee are all great beverages for test day. You can bring, I believe it's a 20-ounce bottle or container of some kind, so you could fill it with probably whatever beverage you want. So keep those in mind. The benefit of granola bars and bananas is that they're easy to unwrap, quick to eat, easy to eat. Water and juice will, of course, make you less thirsty. Too much of any beverage will make you go to the bathroom, so don't drink too much of whatever it is that you choose to have. And again, number one recommendation here is what works for you is fine. Just make sure you're doing it in your practice runs leading up to test day itself so that you don't have any surprises and things go smoothly. Let's talk about what to wear on test day. I would generally recommend wearing comfortable, loose-fitting clothing in layers. You can't wear hoodies because they're not allowed due to test day rules, but wear casual, comfortable clothing. Your favorite t-shirt, sweatshirt, jeans, and sneakers are fine. You could also go the sweatpants route. You don't know whether the test center will be hot or cold, so layers are a good idea. And you could also consider dressing for success. Some students like to wear a blazer or a suit. This is pretty much your opportunity to dress however you would like in a way that will maximize your odds for success. So be thinking about comfort as well as clothing that would improve your mindset. So if that is a sports jersey, do that. If it's putting on lipstick, do that. There's nothing wrong with expressing some creativity here and dressing in a way that will work for you. Let's talk about what to bring on test day. You want to pack your gallon-sized Ziploc bag with everything you'll need for the exam. That includes snacks like a banana or an energy bar. It includes your printed admission ticket with your photo. The ticket details and your location for your exam, your test center, can actually change from when you first registered. So the day before the exam, you want to double check that your admission ticket information is the same as it was previously. You want to print it out then, the final copy the day before. You want to bring a current unexpired government-issued photo ID with your name, matching your name on the admission ticket exactly. There cannot be any variation. So if there's a misspelling on one of them or a middle name on one of them, any of that could be problematic. So you want to confirm with LSAC that you're good, and you want to make sure that you have your current unexpired government-issued photo ID. So that could be a driver's license, a passport card, a non-driver state ID, but your university ID, your student ID, that's probably not going to cut it. You also want to bring your pencils, number 2 pencils specifically, and of course, no mechanical pencils. You also want to bring a pencil sharpener, potentially, as well as an eraser. You might want to bring a watch. If you do, of course, it should be an analog watch. Digital watches are not permitted. And the reason I suggest to consider not bringing a watch is that for some people, constantly being reminded of the passage of time can actually stress them out. So consider whether that's you. Of course, the exam room may have a clock, it may not, but you want to at least have practiced with an analog watch, and you want to know that this is okay for you, that this is a good flow, you're used to it, and this is the same watch you're going to bring on test day. Now, there are a couple of other things that you could also consider bringing. You're allowed to bring, I believe it's a 20-ounce water bottle. So you could consider bringing a water bottle. You might bring tissues. Personal hygiene products are okay. You want to bring your keys, of course, and anything else that would fall into the category of medical hygiene products, like maybe aspirin, for example. You might also consider bringing some warm-up questions to complete outside the test center just before you enter. And these could be photocopied or printed games, reasoning, or reading comprehension questions. Now, just a few, nothing too crazy. And what makes this a killer strategy is that it boosts your confidence before you walk in. You're actually getting them right no matter what because you already know the answers. You've done these before. You're getting your brain warmed up. You're getting some alone time before you join all the other stressed out test takers. And it reminds you that you've already studied for this test a bunch and that you're going to rock it. So take your favorite logic game, a handful of easy logical reasoning questions, or maybe a few tough ones that you know inside out, or a reading comp passage on a topic that you like. And of course, make sure that you're doing just a few questions, not an entire section. So one of the strangest things about LSAC is their insistence on no electronic devices of any kind at the LSAT test center on your test day. And you might be wondering, why do they have such a strong emphasis on this? And I think it may be due to an event or incident that occurred back in February 1997. They released this exam when they don't normally release February LSATs. And I believe the reason they released it is due to a cheating attempt. The Wall Street Journal reported that someone stole an exam test booklet. A proctor chased him, but couldn't stop him from hopping into a getaway car. Hours later, the thief sent the LSAT answers to two test takers at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where the test was just commencing via electronic pager. The proctor became suspicious when she noticed the test takers frequently looking at their pagers. So back in 1997, pagers were apparently still popular back then, and they were used for a cheating attempt on the LSAT. Ever since, LSAC has banned pagers, cell phones, Blackberries, whatever other electronic devices people might be using these days. It goes to show you that LSAC can adapt, they can change, they can update with times, because they're not letting you use the latest technology. And for that reason, they are also not letting you bring a digital watch or any other electronic devices. And they are very strict about this. In fact, there were proctors at one test center, Columbia University in Manhattan, New York. The proctors asked all the students to bring their cell phones up to the front of the room, and then they promptly kicked out all of those students from the test day administration. And they did this because they were jerks, but also because that was their right in line with the rules. LSAC specifically prohibits cell phones. Do not bring them under any circumstances. If anyone catches you looking at one, even if it's silent, even if it's on airplane mode, you'll still get in trouble. You might get kicked out. So leave them home, make other arrangements. People survived. They got around before cell phones. You'll get around afterwards. Write down the phone number of a taxi company if you need one, and then use a payphone if any still exist, or borrow someone's cell phone, maybe the proctor's, and use that for your ride home. No mechanical pencils, only number 2 pencils. Very strict about that as well. No books, magazines, or newspapers. No leisure reading. If you bring warm-up questions as photocopies or printouts, you'll probably have to throw them out before the test starts. No hats, hoodies, or sunglasses, nothing that can hide your face or nothing that could theoretically conceal something. Obviously, religious clothing is acceptable within moderation, I assume, but they make exceptions for that. Earplugs are a big thing. Many people love to study with them, but they will not be allowed on test day. So get used to that in your practice. Get used to that mild ambient noise or other distractions. And finally, no purses, no other bags, no backpacks. You will, of course, be permitted to bring your gallon-sized Ziploc bag, where you will be permitted to include everything that is on the list of what to bring, such as your number 2 pencils, your analog watch, and snacks, etc. So keep the rules in mind. Visit lsac.org for the latest updates on rules and any changes to them. Pack your Ziploc bag at least one day before and make sure that none of these items not to bring are included. Let's talk about vices, specifically drugs. So marijuana and beer, both extremely popular. Of course, marijuana is becoming more popular these days. But as we know, these drugs don't necessarily help you. They may be a release, they may be a way to party and have fun, they may be relaxing, but they're not going to help you perform at your fullest, to perform at 100 or 110%. Both of them can potentially lead to hangovers. They can lead to worsened sleep. So consider reducing or eliminating these drugs in the final weeks before test day. Now, I will say, however, that although I recommend against marijuana, some students have found benefits by using CBD oil, which is, I believe, pronounced cannabinidol, which is one of the active ingredients in marijuana. It does not get you high, which is the reason it is legal everywhere, or at least legal most places, and it's non-psychoactive, but it does tend to have a relaxant effect. Another herb that can help to reduce stress is known as ashwagandha. That's also something to consider. So not all drugs are necessarily vices, even though that's what I titled this lesson. I do also want to recommend, however, that you minimize coffee and cigarettes if you use either one. Of course, do whatever you normally do. If you normally have those in the morning, don't try to go cold turkey now, or you'll almost certainly find yourself with a pounding headache. However, do keep in mind that coffee is a diuretic, so it is likely to make you go to the bathroom. If you normally smoke a lot, you might consider nicotine gum instead. I would only recommend taking Adderall if you've been prescribed it and if you have used it before on practice tests and found that it went well. I got one question from a student related to coffee. Has any student discussed with you about bathroom jitters, such as nerves creating the urge to go? Maybe the coffee or water is just doing their thing. I don't even know how to best ask such a question. Now, this student asked the question fine. I get what the student means. Of course, nerves can make you go to the bathroom, and that certainly happened to me at times. Coffee is a diuretic, so it's better to minimize it if possible. But don't go too far below your norm, though. You also want to reduce water, but have what you need. Bathroom jitters are really just a symptom of a root cause, which is anxiety. This is totally normal. If you can reduce your anxiety, you can reduce your bathroom jitters. So we come back to one of the earlier mental hacks I've talked about before, which is to ask yourself, what happens 3 to 5 years from now if everything goes great? And what happens 3 to 5 years from now if this test administration does not go well? By fleshing out these two possibilities once again, you make them more real for yourself because you reduce the ambiguity of what that unknown negative outcome actually looks like. And as a result, you'll hopefully feel better about whatever may happen. So always ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? And accept that whatever happens, you do have options. Maybe you'll try again, and you'll keep trying until you achieve what you want. Hard work pays off, sometimes slowly. And a lot of the time, although drugs can be appealing, they're not really the way to get there. The ability rests within yourself and the prep that you've done up to this point. Now let's talk about review. Review, properly done, is not just about reviewing the ones you get wrong. It's also every question you have difficulty with and all those questions where you're down to 2 and guess right. Those are still wrong, or at least half wrong in my book, and for that reason they're worthy of review just the same. And the reason I say that is that they easily could have gone the other way as well. You might also be getting things right but not solving them as quickly as you could be, or as efficiently as you could have done. So it's worth investigating those as well. The reason that full-length exams are valuable is in large part because they give you review opportunities. It's not enough to say, oh, I get it now, after looking at the correct answer or explanations and then calling it a day. So here's the review process that I recommend for you. You want to analyze exactly where your error or misunderstanding stemmed from. Was it in the passage or stimulus, or was it in the answer choices? If it was in the passage, was it your approach to reading the passage or stimulus that was ineffective? Or was it something in the passage text itself that you misunderstood? If it was in the answer choices, was it in the incorrect answer choice you chose? If so, identify what it was about the wrong answer choice that tempted you and what ultimately made it wrong in the end. On the other hand, if it was something in the correct answer choice that made it seem unappealing, identify what that was, and then identify what made it correct in the end. By repeating this process several times, you'll see the different types of techniques they use to make incorrect answer choices tempting, and the same techniques they use to make correct answer choices unappealing. Now, right before test day, it's your job to predict where you'll ultimately end up. So what I recommend is to take the most recent exam as a full-length exam just a few days before the exam itself. This most recent exam is most likely to resemble the current direction of the LSAT as it slowly evolves, and it gives you the best indication of how you'll do on test day. And the most recent exam is such a good representation of the current LSAT that it blows my mind when students bring me all these old exams, like the first book of 10 exams ever released, when students are doing exams from the early 90s. Those raw score conversions are different. The questions look different. So do the recent exams, at least one from the most recent 5 or so, and do those in the final week before the exam. If you're taking the LSAT on a Saturday, you could review the mistakes on Thursday, do nothing Friday, and then do a favorite game or LR question as a warm-up on test day. But for your warm-up, remember, the moments before you enter the test center are not the time to review things you got wrong. They're the time to boost your ego with things you rock at. So those warm-up questions you do on test day, make them a favorite game, a favorite passage, a favorite couple of logical reasoning questions. Don't use those as your prediction of where you stand. Use your final full-length exam, or even better, the average of the most recent 5 full-length exams that you took. Let's talk about the day before the LSAT. So this is your opportunity to relax, stress-free. There's nothing else you should be doing or that you need to be doing. So if you want to curl up on the couch, binge watch your favorite TV shows and movies on your favorite streaming platform, that's great. It can be pretty much whatever you want. I would keep it upbeat and inspirational. So Legally Blonde, Friday Night Lights, other positive legal themed movies or TV, totally great. Sports stuff also typically pretty uplifting as well. You could also spend some time in the bathroom, take a hot bath, hot shower. You could get a massage. You could go to the park, spend some time in nature, go for a run, practice meditation, practice yoga. Make this day, the day before the exam, all about you and bringing yourself to a comfortable, relaxed state of mind that will allow you to perform at your fullest potential. You also want to make sure that you pack your gallon-sized Ziploc bag at some point the day before. So your admission ticket, your number 2 pencils, your government-issued unexpired photo ID. This is your time to review my list of what to bring and what not to bring. You want to, of course, go to bed early, be on that early schedule if your exam is in the morning, as most of them are. You want to stay away from alcohol or any other drugs. You don't want to dull your mind. You just want to relax your mind. So instead of alcohol, consider chamomile tea. Go for that level of relaxation. Calm, typically alone or with only a couple of other people. Have a quiet night in. And of course, plan your breakfast. Like I said before, oatmeal, yogurt, eggs, bananas, all great choices. Nothing too heavy, nothing that'll put you in a food coma. Keep it light and keep it to something that you've done before. This is also the time to prep your warm-up LSAT questions. So your printouts or photocopies of your favorite game or passage or a couple of LR questions, get that all ready to go in your Ziploc bag or in your car, wherever you're going to do your practice questions before entering. Do those now. Look up your test center location. So look up where it is, how to get there. Go there if you have any level of anxiety or stress around that. Have multiple options for getting there in case one of them falls through. So if the bus or train doesn't work, what do? Do you have a friend you can call? Do you have a local taxi company's number handy, since given no cell phones, you can't use any apps? So have that ready, have contingency plans ready. And speaking of contingencies, of course, set multiple alarms. So your phone, a second cell phone, a physical actual alarm clock, your computer, have backups in case one of them falls through, because of course you don't want everything to be coming together perfectly and then you sleep through the exam. So think about all of these things and have your plan ready to go. We've talked about what to do the day before, but there's still how to relax and fall asleep the night before. So that's why I wanted to do a separate lesson devoted to this topic, because of course it's hard for many people to fall asleep the night before the big day, the big game, the big event. I certainly have trouble with that still, and I find that relaxation techniques like meditation and guided visualizations can actually help quite a bit. Surprise, surprise. So I've got some of those for you here in this lesson. Now, the following technique in particular is borrowed from the book Relax and Win: Championship Performance by Bud Winter. The book is sports focused, but of course the technique is applicable to a wide variety of events, including the LSAT. So here it is. You start by relaxing the muscles in your face, including your tongue, jaw, and muscles around the eyes. Drop your shoulders down as far down as they'll go, followed by your upper and lower arm, one side at a time. Breathe out, relaxing your chest, followed by your legs, starting from the thighs and working down. You should then spend 10 seconds trying to clear your mind before thinking about one of the following 3 images. You're lying in a canoe on a calm lake with nothing but the clear blue sky above you. You're lying in a black velvet hammock in a pitch black room. You say, "Don't think, don't think, don't think" to yourself over and over for about 10 seconds. The first 2 are guided visualizations. The third is a kind of mantra meditation where you repeat a word, a phrase, a statement over and over and over as a focusing technique to help you clear your mind. Whichever of these techniques you choose, any of these 3, it's said to work for 96% of people after 6 weeks of practice using these techniques. Now, of course, you may not have 6 weeks, but that's fine. Even doing this just once or just a handful of times can still give you a variety of benefits. Now, in order to relax and fall asleep, you don't really need to do any of those techniques I previously mentioned. There's really only 3 things you need: a bedroom that will allow you to sleep, comfortable bed, pillow, blankets, whatever it is, a quiet room, a relaxed body, and a quiet mind. You can't go to sleep if your mind is racing, so anything you can do to slow it down will help you sleep. That could be a bath, relaxing music, tea, preferably herbal without caffeine, meditation, like I've mentioned, and anything that will reduce stressors and stimulants. So that could be caffeine, but it could also be reducing screen time in the final hours before bed. There's no one magic way of doing this. You'll really have to just find what works for you. So it could be something I've mentioned, or it could be reading or aromatherapy or listening to Pink Floyd. It doesn't really matter what you do as long as it stops you from worrying about the stresses of the following day. So try out these techniques in the final week or so, find what works for you, and keep on doing it because the big day is just around the corner. Let's talk about how to decide whether to withdraw, take the LSAT and then cancel it, or take the LSAT and then keep your score. We've already talked about the test date change deadline, also known as postponement deadline, which is approximately 3 weeks before the LSAT. However, LSAC also offers a withdrawal option, which means that you can decide up until the day before the LSAT whether you'll be taking it or not. If you withdraw, then law schools will never even know you were registered for that exam date in the first place. So in other words, law schools wouldn't be able to tell that you've withdrawn. It's not noted on your record in any way. Of course, withdrawing after the postponement deadline means you won't get any refund at all for your LSAT registration fee. Postponement is 3 weeks before or prior, you get a partial refund. Withdrawal means you are deciding later that you don't want to take the LSAT, and so for that reason, LSAC does not give you any refund of your fee. The benefit, of course, is that you don't have to have an absence on your record if 2 weeks before or 1 week before you decide that, you know what, you're not ready or something awful happened and you need to postpone to a later date, but the postponement deadline passed. So what do? You withdraw. That is your option now. You still have the final 3 weeks before test date to keep taking practice tests, brushing up on weak areas, and doing whatever you can to boost your LSAT scores. You can take the LSAT later, at a future date, when your scores are closer to your goal score. This removes the pressure of having a potential absence or cancellation notated on your record. And of course, if you're not feeling ready the day before the LSAT, you just withdraw and aim for the next LSAT administration. Alternatively, you can show up and take the exam with the plan to cancel all along. This gives you the benefit of LSAC's proctoring, and it gives you the benefit of taking the LSAT in real world conditions. Of course, the downside is you'll have a cancellation on your record, but the good news is that this matters a lot less than it used to. More and more students are retaking, more and more students are canceling, and totally fine. Law schools don't care about just 1 or 2 cancellations. Of course, more than that starts to look a little bit unreliable, and we'll talk about cancellations later. But for now, my general recommendation is that you would only want to cancel if you know something went wrong. I would err towards withdrawing if that's something on your mind. Of course, you can also just take the exam and keep your score whatever it is. Again, cancellations are less good an idea than they were previously. They're not really a great option anymore unless you know something went terribly wrong. Now, ultimately, let's say you're in that final week, you're at the day or two before. How do you decide whether to take the LSAT or withdraw? What you want to do is you analyze your recent scores, take the average of the most recent 5 or so, and take that to be the best indication of where you'll most likely score on test day. At that point, you can decide whether you're going to withdraw, take it and cancel, or take it and keep it on your scheduled LSAT test date. The day of the LSAT. Congratulations, we finally made it, everyone. We're at the day of, we're at the big day, test day, here it is. So, first step is waking up. Obviously, you don't want to wake up right before the test. You want to wake up ideally at least 2 to 3 hours minimum before the test starts. The reason for this is sleep inertia. Your brain actually takes a few hours to fully wake up in the morning. That's why sometimes people feel kind of sleep drunk when they're first getting up, when they're first getting out of bed. And you want to have plenty of time to get to this test center, eat a good-sized breakfast beforehand, and make sure that you're fully awake. In the week leading up to the exam, hopefully you've been able to avoid any major fluctuations in your sleep schedule. Otherwise, you risk not operating at 100% on test day itself. You also want to leave early so that you're not going to run the risk of being late. The proctors, of course, can and do start on time whenever possible. The test door closes at that point, and even if not everyone has arrived, they don't care. They go ahead with it. They are strict about not letting in latecomers typically. Morning of, you don't want to do anything new. Don't do anything differently from what you've done all the other mornings you've taken practice tests. So don't suddenly start drinking coffee if you haven't been. Don't take Adderall for the first time. So you're going to leave for the test center early. You'll get there early. You'll find a spot to camp out and do your warm-up questions. Those are your printouts and photocopies of your favorite game, reading comp passage, couple of LR questions. You camp out, you do those, you toss them before walking in. The only thing you bring in with you is your gallon-sized Ziploc bag containing all permitted items. So remember, go back and review what to bring, what not to bring. I have lessons on that. There's, of course, also LSAC's website with all the details as well. So you get there, you do your warm-up questions. You don't score them, though. There's no need to score them because they're all questions you've done anyway in the past. You've done them already. You know them. Once you've finished your warm-up questions, of course, you'll want to go into the test center, but I would still recommend that you avoid talking to other test takers. You don't know what they're going to say. They might say something that ends up stressing you out for one reason or another. They're an unpredictable factor. So for that reason, I would steer clear of the other test takers, the other students. However, it's a good idea to speak with the proctors. Just confirm with them that you're going to get 35 minutes per section, assuming no accommodations. You'll get a 5-minute warning before the end of each section, and you'll get a 15-minute break between the third and fourth sections. So confirm all that with the proctors, but the other test takers, avoid them. People will often try to talk to you because they're nervous or they want your reassurances that everything's going to go okay for them, but you're there for yourself. Make this time about you. And so make your own kind of personal do not disturb status just so that they'll leave you alone and you don't run the risk of them throwing you off your game. You've listened to your motivational music, you've watched your motivational videos, and you're at this point, you either you know it or you don't. So trust that you've got this and go out there and rock the exam. So we made it. Test day, however it went well, went poorly, doesn't matter. Just the fact that you've taken the LSAT, that alone is an accomplishment, whether you'll have to retake or not later. So for now, treat yourself. Go out and celebrate with friends and family. You took the LSAT, you did it. Regardless of your test scores, be proud of yourself for having had the guts to do it, because believe it or not many people do. You might ask, what does treating yourself look like? Well, a lot of it's the same stuff you did the day before the LSAT when you relaxed. So if you enjoyed binge watching TV and movies, or you enjoyed getting a massage or taking a hot bath or going for a run, doing yoga, that's all great. But now, of course, you can go out and party with your friends. You deserve it. It's your time. So take that and treat yourself. Now, of course, not everyone's LSAT test day goes well. So let's talk about what to do if you have a bad test center experience. Of course, you can complain to LSAC and you could potentially write an addendum about it, but admissions is always going to be a numbers game. And so whatever happened, believe it or not, there is someone else out there who had it worse than you did. Worse proctors, worse fellow test takers, a fire alarm going off, a marching band outside. Any of those things could happen to you, and writing an addendum might not really help that much. Some admission consultants might tell you not to call attention to it. Others might tell you that including more information is better. This sort of thing is not really much of a science. I'd say ultimately it's a toss-up whether you write an addendum based on a bad LSAT test center experience, but I would lean towards recommending against it. It's better to focus on writing the best personal statement for yourself and preparing for a retake, because let's say a 160 plus addendum explaining or making excuses why it wasn't higher is not nearly as valuable as getting, let's say, a 165 or higher. The raw number matters. The addendum is not really going to give you an extra point or two, so I would encourage you to just focus on getting the best LSAT score possible for yourself. If things went horribly wrong, we can talk about canceling, which is what we will do in the next lesson, so stay tuned for that. Let me start by clarifying something. Law schools do not average multiple scores. I can't repeat this enough. There's this old myth going around that law schools average multiple scores, so you're at a disadvantage for retaking and you might want to cancel if you have any idea or any inkling that the test did not go well. This is misguided, it's outdated. Law schools only report the highest score of their accepted matriculating students to the ABA, the American Bar Association. And that is what gets considered for the ever important US News law school rankings. So even those law schools that say they consider multiple scores, they're lying to you. They only take the highest, they only consider the highest in their calculations. That's the only thing they have the incentive to do. It's in their interests, and that's how law school admissions deans are rated. That's how they're compensated. That determines their careers. So don't cancel unless something unexpected went terribly wrong. And I'm talking about things like the proctors screwed up the timing, or you got sick, or there were noises like a fire alarm or a marching band outside. Those kinds of catastrophic events that could really screw you up for the entire exam. Maybe you plan to cancel before going in anyway, and you took this just for the experience of having an official proctor test. Of course, that's fine. Cancel if you want to. If you panicked and just plain forgot everything you knew, then of course, that's a good reason to cancel. If you misbubbled, that's a good reason to cancel. And if maybe you didn't give yourself enough time to study the first time around, or this time around, whatever it is for you, if you feel you could do significantly better with a few more months to study, or you feel you really didn't give yourself enough time to study before, then those are all good reasons to consider canceling. But if you feel that things overall went all right, but then maybe there was just one or two things that did not go your way, then of course, those are reasons to not cancel. If you simply have a vague sense that things didn't go amazingly, that's common. Don't worry about it. Keep your score. If it just seemed a little bit harder than what you've taken before as practice material, then of course, that is also not a reason to cancel your score. And if you feel like you just didn't do as well as normal, and maybe you got a few more points wrong than you normally do, then don't cancel. Also, don't cancel the day of the exam. You have 6 calendar days to do it. So there's no reason to make a rash decision in the heat of the moment, the day of the exam, right when you walk out or while you're still there. There's no upside to canceling sooner, so give yourself a day or two to breathe and rethink what happened, go over it in your mind, and then make a more calm decision. Now, when you're canceling, of course, you have to contact LSAC. And if you have a bad experience, you also want to contact LSAC. So visit their website, lsac.org. You can review the test day rules to make sure that you didn't misunderstand anything, and you can email or call them. I like to recommend emailing over calling because that way you're getting a more official documented response from them. But again, don't cancel right away and strongly consider keeping your score because there really is virtually no downside to having a low score now and then a higher score later. And remember that whatever happened, you can always retake. So let's say you're not in love with your score or you're not in love with the way that test day went for you and you're thinking about retaking. Retaking is more common than ever, in part because having multiple scores on record does not really put you at any kind of disadvantage. Of course, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 scores on record, that will start to look a little bit less good than having only, let's say, 2, but not a big deal. Law schools, like I said before, they only consider the highest score. That's all that goes into their equations. So having multiple scores is not a reason not to retake. If it's going to be your 4th take, that's totally fine. I also get a lot of questions from students about applying later in the cycle. Let's say that you were taking the LSAT in the summer or the fall, and now you're pushing back to retake in the winter, or you're pushing back your applications to retake in the spring. And you're worried about what happens when you're taking the LSAT the same calendar year that you'd want to start law school. Good news is that applying early matters much less than it used to. Law schools are deferring and waitlisting more and more applicants because they want to see who else will come along. And that is due in part to the recent decline in the number of students taking the LSAT, applying to law school. So they're waiting and they're delaying. And so for that reason, there's not really much of a disadvantage, if any, to applying relatively later in the cycle. What you do want to think about, though, is when you're retaking, what will you do differently this time around? Did you take several practice exams before taking the LSAT officially on test day? Of course, doing those exams would not be enough. You'd also have to review them in detail. You also, of course, want to make sure that you were using actual official recent LSAT prep tests and that you were using top quality LSAT materials, not the random books you might find on a bookstore shelf. So think about what you can do differently with materials, what you can do differently with your approach, what you can do differently in terms of the time that you invest in your studying. You also want to look at what may not have gone well in your prep up to this point, or what may not have gone well on test day itself. Did you have a test day score drop, or do you expect to have one? Maybe you did not properly simulate LSAT test day conditions. Maybe nerves, anxiety, or stress got the better of you. And so you want to look at what strategies and techniques, what tools you can use this time that you didn't use before in order to make the most of your LSAT retake experience. You also want to look at your predicted score versus your actual score. Did you score right on target with what your average was and you just want to do better? Or did you have a drop and then maybe your practice tests were not relatively indicative of what your actual exam day experience was? So look at all of those factors. You want to consider all of those factors, and you want to make sure that you're putting in the time. And so if there are holidays or vacations or family obligations or work obligations between now and your next test date, you might want to push it back even further. Or if life is just going to be really busy and complicated over the next several months, maybe you don't want to retake, and maybe the score that you have now is going to be it for you, and that's fine with you. Or maybe you want to delay an entire year so that you'll be able to put in the time. So think about what your next few months looks like between now and the next LSAT administration or two, and then think about what you could do differently over that period. And structure your life in such a way that if you do want to retake, you'll be able to surround yourself with the resources and the tools and the people potentially, whether it's tutoring or coaching or a class or a study group, in order to set yourself up for success on your retake. So you've taken the LSAT, you've decided whether you're going to cancel, whether you're going to retake. So now you owe it to yourself to relax, have fun, get out there, enjoy some sunshine, and try not to spend too much time on message boards. They're most likely just going to stress you out. So I would stay away from those. Of course, if you want to review the exam when it's released, you can certainly do that just to see what you got right, what you got wrong, better understand everything. But go do something fun you've never done before. Just get some adrenaline pumping that is not LSAT related. You could even plan a fun trip or get together with friends the day or the weeks after the exam. Just something to look forward to. And work on your personal statement, work on your applications. If you're considering retaking, then you could, of course, start studying for a potential retake, but give yourself some time off just for yourself, because you've probably been working pretty hard up to this point, and I wouldn't want you to run the risk of burning out. So do some studying, work on your applications, but treat yourself. Continue treating yourself. That's really my number one recommendation for you in especially the week after the LSAT. Just treat yourself. Weeks beyond that, of course, do some more practical things. But for now, just enjoy this time for you. You've earned it. So yeah, that was a lot. Congratulations on making it to the end. I hope that it gave you some new insights as you prepare for LSAT test day. If you enjoyed that video, I have a related one that's about the 7 biggest mistakes I see students making on LSAT test day, so I'll link to that below. I've also done some other long videos about the LSAT and preparing for test day. They were live Q&A sessions. They're about an hour long each. I'm linking to some of those below as well if you'd like to check them out. So anyway, thanks for watching. All the best to you on the LSAT and take care.